Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us for, I know this is the last session of today's Everything Policy program, but I think it's going to be a really exciting discussion. We're going to take a little bit of a different tack, but still connected to and relevant to some of the topics you heard discussed earlier today. I'm Avonne Bell. I'm the Director of Connected Life at CTIA. So the wireless industry is renowned for its innovative and ever-evolving products and services that successfully connect people and that have been foundational to pretty much all of our day-to-day activities. But what people may not necessarily know as much is that there's a lot of work that the wireless companies are doing in a host of initiatives aimed at improving and advancing broader societal interests, including lowering emissions, promoting diversity, providing equitable opportunities, and connecting communities. These issues were actually a key part of many of this morning's keynote remarks. In fact, GFSMA's Matt Grinnard encouraged conference attendees to think about how we can use mobile innovations to build a better and more sustainable future. And I thought that was really, really important and sort of really kind of connected to what we're going to talk about today, which is wireless for good. So joining me for today's discussion to share some thoughts on these issues and how we use wireless for a better future are, right to my immediate left, Colleen Powell is the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer with American Tower. And then we have Robert Branson, who is President and CEO of the Multicultural Media, Telecom, and Internet Council, also known as MMTC. Thank you guys for being here today.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you for having us.
All right, so let's jump right in. I think the first topic we're going to talk about is talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. The wireless industry has long been recognized for its collective responsibility to reflect the diversity of the communities that make up America. Colleen, for some people, it's not obvious the connection between wireless infrastructure, that your company, American Tower, works on, and issues like DEI. Why is DEI important to a company like yours? And can you talk to us about some of the things that's being done to further this area?
Sure, definitely. So first of all, let me tell you a little bit about American Tower. American Tower is a leading provider of wireless communications multi-tenant infrastructure. And what that means is you're going to say, how come I'm not sure that I know about your company? Some of you are thinking that. And that's because you are familiar with your wireless carrier. Those are our customers. So we serve you indirectly. You use our resources every time you talk on your phone or use some other form of wireless broadband, and including when you're checking your emails during our panel. We see you. We know what you're doing. And so we are located in 25 countries. We are headquartered here in the United States in Boston, Massachusetts, where we all spend some time. And we have 43,000 towers in the US, and we have 220,000 towers across the globe. So we have a really broad reach. And we feel like for that reason, it's really important not only who we hire in our internal practices to be more equitable and inclusive and diversifying the industry, but also thinking about how our industry is deeply connected with issues that impact society overall. One of the ways that we saw that is that during the pandemic, it really brought to focus the centrality of digital access to and wireless access to people and how that made a difference in people's lives. How many of you were able to work from home during the pandemic? So good for you. That probably helped you limit your exposure, keep you safer. How many of you had maybe children who were going to school remotely? Great. And you all have the Carolines on your faces to show how stressful that was. I did too. I had a 4-year-old and I was at the time, and when everything shut down. But guess what? If you were a hairdresser, if you were a restaurateur, if you were a server in a restaurant, if you were many of the people who make our beds every day in the hotels that we stayed in, you could not do that. You could not give a cab ride remotely. And though I did try with my hairdresser, you could not do someone's hair remotely. And so what we found is that though we were in the same boat, we were in the same storm, we were not in the same boat. Many people who lacked access to broadband were deeply impacted. In Boston, Massachusetts, where I live, 20% of students dropped out of school. That's K through 12 school, 20%. So you think about what that looks like over the course of time, and those will become adults. And what does that mean? Now, why did they drop out? Some of them were, when we went remote, some of them didn't have access to broadband. So they couldn't just learn online because they didn't have access at home. 2, they also sometimes had to take care of younger siblings. Sometimes they had a parent who lost their job or who was sick due to COVID, and they had to make money and earn money for the family. Also, sometimes there were multiple kids, and so who gets the device? Either the parent gets the device to work remotely, or one of the 3 kids has to balance their access. So what we found is that there were these huge issues that were fundamentally equity issues. And so that's really where American Tower comes in. Our interest is in providing access to our employees, who we also see as reflective. We have local teams in all of those 25 countries. So our first thing was to shore up our team members and make sure that they were safe and healthy, and to provide them resources that sometimes weren't available in their countries. But number 2, it's also to think about how are we impacting our customers and the end user? How can we provide this access on a broader scale to provide more equity, to provide more access, and to provide more options, even access to information, healthcare, education, financial resources through broadband access. So we're really thinking sort of broadly about, and we think we should be, as a leading provider, we should be thinking more broadly about not only providing the access, but who has access and how to really democratize that around the world.
Thanks. So Robert, sort of piggybacking on what Colleen said, I know that diversity in this space is also really critical for your organization. And in fact, MMTC partnered with CTIA earlier this summer and put out a report about wireless in communities of color. So can you speak to some of the factors that you guys think are essential in sort of advancing wireless in the advancing diversity, in the wireless industry, and also how wireless has directly transformed the lives of diverse communities?
Oh, thank you for that question. It's always hard to go about Pat after you, by the way. But it's great statements. But you know, when we did that paper, you know, I had some people who looked at me, you know, why are you talking about wireless? You know, we should be talking about other industries. And I think chief among those was fiber and things of that nature. So I told them, look, what we have to do is, you know, we have to start with the fact, and it is a fact, that available solutions, you know, all available solutions should be used in the communities. In other words, there's not one size fits all in every community. You know, I look at my own hometown where my 90-year-young mother lives, and there is no fiber, there is no real wired solution. When she wants to watch church services on Sunday morning, it's usually one of our cell phones or one of our tablets that's bringing in a wireless signal that she's using to do that. So I know some people push fiber as the best solution for people on the internet, but you know, it's just not there for everybody. Sometimes wireless can be the best solution. Now, from MMTC standpoint, you know, we have been looking at things, you know, I mean, how to get more and more people involved in broadband, you know, and we know, and we all in this room know the reasons people have not gotten involved. One is, you know, they don't have service in their area. 2, they can't afford it. 3, they don't understand how to use it. 4, they do not trust it. 5, they do not see it as useful, among other things. So we know that broadband is important. So that's what MMTC has been trying to do, educate people. First, we've been trying to educate people on the ACP. Actually, let's back up a little bit before I get there. We first had our organization where we were looking at how to tell them about the emergency broadband benefit. We did that last year, and we've pushed very, very hard for Congress to adopt the ACP, which we thought was very, very crucial. I mean, that we get funding for that. So this year we have gone into pushing for more and more people sign up. In fact, I got to do a little promo. This past Saturday we had something called Black Churches for Digital Equity, and
church fair.
Yes, well, if you go to a black church,
that is a
you will find anyone who's ever been to a black church knows. You gotta have the black. You gotta have the fan to defend yourself.
That is an official black church
fan.
fan.
And we created one just for that purpose.
Now that's outreach.
Yes, and people understand this, and people will have this, and people. I mean, you can go to a black church today, and you will still find a Martin picture of Martin Luther King Jr.
Yes, it has Martin Luther King Jr. on it. That's
on
what
it.
it's supposed to have.
So that's the first thing. So we are working on that. But let me address wireless specifically, though. You know, it wasn't me, but before my time at MMTC, one of my predecessors dubbed wireless as being the minority wireless miracle. Now, why did they do that? And that was back in the 2010s. You know, because at that time they thought wireless was a significant factor in bridging the digital divide. You know, in other words, you know, back in that time, people oftentimes couldn't afford a laptop. There really wasn't the wired community, and you know, I mean, and if they did afford a laptop, you only had one laptop in the household. You know, and so wireless. Every kid almost could have a device, and every kid could do things. And wireless, you could move around, and you could take it to school. You could do your homework and things of that nature. So, which is why I guess even today, you know, when you look at it, I like to throw some numbers out here too, if I could. You know, it seems like minorities in particular over-index on wireless compared to others communities. You know. 91% of adults in the U.S. are now connected to high-speed internet access. 85% own a smartphone. You know, and about 15% of adults rely solely on a smartphone for broadband internet access. And this number increases to 25% for Latinos and 17% for African Americans. I mean, so it's really clear that wireless is a very valuable solution to closing the digital divide. And that's why we have been pushing it not as the sole solution, but as one of the solutions. The other thing, frankly, we've been pushing is the supplier diversity issue. I know you didn't ask me about that one, but that's one thing we do push here because we like to have more wireless companies like yourselves and others reaching out to the minority community, minority vendors and others to try to get them more involved, because we think if you build it in a community and there are people in the community who are helping to build it, you know, people who are going up on the poles, going up on the towers and doing anything nature, that's more likely to add for more adoption in the community. In other words, if you can see Joe down the corner has a job with a company that's building it out, you will more likely want to be part of that service and buy that service. So.
Great. No, I think you guys really did a good job of sort of addressing the issue of DEI and thinking about it in a different way, but also connecting it to my next area of focus, which is thinking about broadband access. You really did a good job of bridging that divide. You know, I think when, as you mentioned, people think about digital divide, particularly for a lot of communities of color, wireless has sort of been central and has played a critical role in sort of providing connectivity in that space. The value, I think, has been recognized for a while, but really, as you mentioned, Colleen, the pandemic sort of really highlighted the need, not just for, I would say, wireless broadband, but broadband generally, but the wireless industry really did step up and play a critical role for a number of communities across the country in sort of helping them to get access. Robert, I'm going to turn to you first. So in the MMTC report, you talked about the fact that wireless sort of served as a major on-ramp for connectivity for minority communities. And over the last few years, the FCC has been playing a really important role in implementing a number of programs that are aiming to help close some of these digital divides. We've seen even more recently that NTIA has jumped on board with the FCC in having further programs aimed at trying to address these issues. So we have the government agencies working to deal with sort of increasing broadband adoption and greater broadband access. And you also have the wireless industry that's really been focused on deploying networks across the country to help increase that access. What can you talk a little bit, Robert, about some of these government programs and industry efforts that you think are important to helping to close the digital divide? I know you started talking a little bit about ACP and some of these newer efforts, but maybe give the audience a little bit more information about these programs and why you think they're critical, and hopefully, you know, will really get us to a good point in sort of closing a lot of the divides that exist across the country.
You know, we're in a historic period. Never before, and I've been in this business quite a long time, never before have I seen the numbers that Congress has and the FCC and NTIA are going to have to play with. But, I mean, in 2021, Congress allocated $3.2 billion, I mean, that's billion with a B, for the EBB program. and then an additional $14 billion for the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, for the long-term affordable connectivity program. And I think some of the people on the congressional panels noted that Congress hopefully is going to be looking at expanding that and making that more long-term. But in the meantime, $14 billion is not a small number, and NTIA has received $42 billion for the Broadcast Equity, Access, and Deployment, or BEAD program, as we refer to it. It's so much out there, but the problem is that we got a lot of money. We got to make sure it's used properly, and we get it out there to the people who need it. It's interesting. This year, all the major carriers decided to offer a $30 plan for everybody, which is never seen that before. As everything else, and I think as your chair was noting, everything else, inflation is going up, but wireless service and telecommunications service is staying flat. It actually is going down. We think $30. So that was good. The three major carriers, like I said, all stood up and said, "Hey, look, we're gonna allow people to be able to get broadband for $30, which like I said, is fabulous. Other companies too. And I'll give you some numbers too that we have in my report. AT&T pledged to invest $2 billion over the next 3 years to help address the digital divide, doubling the $1 billion investment it made over the previous 3 years. As part of its efforts, AT&T has opened 20 new connected learning centers in under-resourced communities across the country, including Dallas, Cleveland, Detroit. Similarly, Verizon has pledged $3 billion through its Citizens Verizon plan to support economic, environmental, and social advancement. Verizon, part of its plan, is going to use their Verizon Innovative Learning Program to address barriers to digital inclusion by connecting students, teachers, schools, and districts with free internet access, devices, innovative next-generation technology, and more. T-Mobile, who we originally were going to have on the panel, and I didn't write my notes down with all they've done, but they've done with the numbers, but they also have stepped up to do it as well. So with three major corporations not only putting their money in, with the government, NTIA, and money they will have, the money that Congress allocated, like I said, I can't say it enough times. It's a very historic time that we must take advantage of. And that's why we at MMTC, like I said, are going out into the community. We're not only working, with people in the community, we also work with organizations like No Home Left Behind, local organizations trying to make sure everybody's wired. We're working with, and like I said, while we have a Black churches program, we work with other groups as well. We work with Hispanic groups. We've been working with the tribal groups and others. So to try to spread the word, because we focused on Black churches because that's what we know. The people on my team, they knew the church leaders, the faith leaders. So that's what we started with. But we want to have that spread on to other leagues because we think the message and the way we are doing things can be very helpful for these other communities as well.
Great. No, I think that's really important. You showed us an example with the church fan, and definitely brings back memories. Right. Colleen, so we've talked a bit, obviously, about the wireless carriers, as you notice, are your customers, and I wanted you to talk a little bit about sort of the role of wireless infrastructure, maybe some of the things that American Tower has been doing to help with deployment, thinking about connected to some of these government programs that are aimed at sort of helping fund and help with deployment and building out more wireless connectivity and broadband across the country.
Sure, thank you so much. And first of all, I just want to thank and acknowledge the MMTC and Robert's work in advancing access, diversity, and equity and inclusion. He really does remarkable work. And so I'd encourage any of you who are looking for advice on this or partnership, I think that his organization would be a wonderful organization to partner with. Yeah. I think for us, as a global institution, we see not only the issues that Robert spoke about in the United States, but we also see this issue globally. And one of the things that we saw is that there are some communities, particularly outside of the United States, where we have a tower, which means we have power, we have electricity, and we have the internet and security. And the community around us may have nothing. They may not have any broadband access unless they are lucky enough to have a device. And so we saw that disconnect, and we wanted to really close that gap. So what we started is something called our Digital Communities Program, and that is where we use our tower access and we invite the community in to take advantage of we load it up with computers. They have access to clean restrooms if we have them there. They have access to security. And for some people, this is literally the only access point they have to the internet. We have a story of a kid who was in Africa who had been studying computer for 10 years. And this is like a young kid. But he had never had access to an actual computer until we opened a digital community in Ghana. And so you think about it, they're like, imagine what this would be like. And the teachers are doing everything they can to help educate these students, but they didn't have access to actual computers, which is unacceptable. I mean, in 2022, no child should have to imagine what a computer is like. That's really an issue of will. That's an issue of will and access. So we have this program. We've done over 300 of them in 8 countries. We'd like to expand them over the next several years broadly in other countries that completely lack access. And it's not only giving access to young kids, it's also giving access to their families. There are a lot of women in these communities that don't have access. A lot of people who don't have access to education resources, financial resources, healthcare information. As you recall, even during the pandemic, new information was coming out. Like every 2 months, the guidance would change. And so you really had to stay on top of it. And so the internet is a really important way for people to stay on top, not only to access resources that can help them improve their lives overall, but also can help them stay on top of changing dynamics. So our digital communities is really a flagship program that we are trying to broadly expand, but also really trying to do what we can in the US to provide computers and devices and access to places where we do have still a digital divide, even in the United States, not only in communities where there is poverty or they're under resources, but in rural communities, rural and urban. So we have I would say sort of a multi-tiered, we have to be multi-tiered and right size our approach depending on the geography we're in. And honestly, it's kind of a gift to be as large as we are and have the expanse that we do, to be able to outreach to some of the communities that we do, and honestly really leverage and build the talent that they have in those countries, which honestly we've been able to take advantage of. We have local teams in those 25 countries. So we want to create more. There's so much talent we're in 5 continents and every single one of them is brimming with talent. So this is an opportunity to support their families and communities, and then also invest in the next generation.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Great. The Digital Communities Program really sounds like an amazing program in terms of thinking about sort of not just looking at these issues on a national scale, but a global scale, because obviously we recognize that there are a lot of communities way beyond the US that probably have even less access, and, just with the right opportunities and access, the capabilities are boundless in terms of what they can do and where it can go. So that's really amazing. So, so we've talked a lot about sort of equity and access and how that works in this broader space. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about sort of how wireless is being put to work in some other areas. As we close out, I wanted to provide each of you an opportunity to talk about maybe a more tangible way that wireless technologies like 5G are being used for good. Robert, can you tell us about some of the wireless/5G use cases MMTC identified that have had real-world impact on consumers of color?
I'll be happy to. But before I go there,
Sure.
I want to pick up on your point here. In order to get people to sign up for the ACP, we in DC at least, and in other states, we actually offered raffles for laptops. And I think the big raffle, I hate to say, was the iPhone that we were willing to let someone get. And we thought that probably would attract more people to come to than anything else, which also once again shows you impact of wireless, because that was a draw for many of those people. But to your question, we look at a lot of use cases. One, of course, is education, as was mentioned earlier and mentioned, I'm sure, many times. During the pandemic, kids suffered. I mean, a lot of kids, and as you pointed out, The kids just did not do as well, and some had to drop out or do other things of that nature. Kids were driving to McDonald's and other places in order to get wired, or didn't have enough devices in the home. So we see wireless as being able to do that. One of the things we pointed out in the paper, though, was, we wanted to be honest. So we did note in the paper that there are some limitations to using wireless. And that's in there. And that was one thing that was key to us, is that while there are limitations, that doesn't mean they're permanent limitations. Those are limitations that we can fix if we identify them and point them out and get them fixed. Like when people need to do things with them. So hopefully when people read that, those who have brighter minds, who have the technology skills, will figure out how to do some of these things that we need. That moves me into the other point, which is jobs and training. A recent Pew study found 60% of workers whose work can be performed at home are working from home. As we know, most of us, if we have a choice, we stay at home. If we have young kids, we work from home sometimes, even though sometimes the kids probably drive us crazy and we want to go back to the office.
We try to go to school, go to work.
Exactly, sometimes. But reducing or eliminating the commute, is great. My commute to my office is an hour each way. So if I can work from home, I'm actually a lot more productive, And we found that for workers, that's not, while not all jobs can be performed remotely, but 5G can also help with training, safety training, efficiency, and things of that nature. For example, one of the Seattle companies is partnering with 5G Open Innovation Labs, AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, and others, to pair 5G with augmented reality and mixed reality in a work instruction platform that enhances training for frontline workers in industries such as manufacturing, energy, and defense. And we saw during the keynotes how the students were being able to use the Meta, the Meta goggles that cost quite a bit, but I think what they've done was they scaled them down and made them more affordable for the students, which is great. Healthcare, during the pandemic, I know my wife's a pediatrician, so I know she had a lot of virtual visits because people just weren't coming into the office early on. Either they didn't want them in office because of concerns with COVID, or it just was more efficient to do online. And so people learn more and more how to use it. My own doctor, did a virtual visit. So for healthcare, being able to do things and even more basic stuff, we're going to be able to do it, bring that healthcare to rural communities and nature. Climate change, you may want to talk a little bit more on that because your organization does more on that than we do. But I know wireless is also helping with that. Right. So.
No, great. That's a great point, Robert. Thanks for sort of teeing that up for me. Colleen, the U.S. has set national targets to reduce the nation's greenhouse gas emissions. Can you speak to how 5G wireless will help sort of achieve some of these sustainability goals?
Sure. So in deploying 5G effectively in the United States will help us, number one, meet our Paris Agreement commitments. And it will also get us 20% of the way there to reaching our climate goals and our carbon footprint reduction goals by 2025. That is nearly the equivalent of taking 72 million cars off the road. So it's a huge impact. Since 2012, what we see is we try to look at what we can do as a infrastructure provider, but really we like to multiply our effect by seeing what can we also help our customers do. And so we've made $400 million worth of infrastructure investments to become more energy efficient since 2012. We've also think about our customers and trying to find ways that they can be more effective. I'm so happy to have head of our, the three of my colleagues here in the back. You want to wave? Rich, Steve, Jen, who really, I feel like I'm window dressing. Steve Vondran and his team really do the hard work on this. He's the head of our US business, and they really think strategically with customers about what they can do to decrease their greenhouse gas emissions. Another thing I would say is that we've signed on to a lot of agreements, a lot of global agreements, because we recognize that climate change is not one of those things that you can do on your own. It's something that you have to do in collaboration and in agreement and cooperation with others. And so we have adopted science-based targets. We have adopted the UN Global Compact, the UN Women's Empowerment Principles, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We are really in a fight together. And I know that, the political debate around this tends to be very polarized. But the truth is, I think that most Americans and most people around the world really do want a more sustainable future. We may have different methods of getting there, but I think there's a lot more to agree upon in this space than there is to disagree upon. So I think we, working together with people, we become more sustainable. We use power more effectively. That allows us to actually give access to more communities who can't maybe afford some of the investments that we've made. And, it's really, I think, more than a contribution. I think it's our responsibility.
Well, that's great. Looks like we're at time, but I will just say thank you guys so much for joining us. That was really informative discussion. I think these are really important issues sort of as we're at this conference thinking about the technology and thinking about, spectrum and how to get us there. It's also useful to sort of look at how these technologies are being used and think about the real world impact and how it really can have a beneficial impact for the broader community. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Avonne.